And that then creates inflation, because if you're a business, whether you have services you provide or whether you do manufacturing of goods, if your labor costs go up, you have to increase the cost of your services or increase the cost of your goods. What the Fed is really worried about is inflation becomes ingrained in the economy. And what that means is really simple. Everyone in this room, we all think, hey, inflation's 8%. It's been at 8% every month. It's going to stay at 8%. We all go to our bosses, ask for an 8% wage increase every year. And every company raises their goods costs 8%. And everything goes up 8%. No one gets ahead. You get paid 8% more as an employee, but what you have to buy to live goes up 8%. This becomes a vicious cycle that's really hard to break, and no one gets ahead. That is what the Fed is worried about, and that's why they're trying so hard to get inflation down to 2 before it becomes ingrained and just becomes really painful to stop. So the job openings really, as much as it's good to have a strong labor market, but it's too tight. With more jobs posted than we have humans going back to work, that creates inflationary pressure. So let's talk about inflation. Every month, inflation reports come out, and inflation is really simple. Every month, as humans, we buy goods. Food, shelter, clothing, cars, whatever it is we buy. What economists do is they measure like a basket of goods, and they say, okay, if you're going to buy the same basket of goods, what does that basket cost in June? And if you bought the same basket in July, how much did the price go up? And so there's two reports. The Federal Reserve's favorite report, called PCE. It's the personal consumption expenditures, and it's just a way to show inflation. The other one is CPI, which is Consumer Price Index. These are just a bunch of nerd economists create their own little baskets. There's two different reports. They come up every month, and the markets look at them. What I would say is the most important part when you see the monthly reports, there's always two numbers. There's the headline number, which is the whole basket, everything in the basket, and they have what they call the core number. The core number is that regular basket. They take food prices out and gasoline prices out. And the reason they do that is food prices and gasoline prices tend to bounce around a lot each month. And if you're trying to track a trend in the economy, that can kind of mask a trend if you have two items bouncing around a lot. So they have their core inflation, which takes out food and energy prices, and they have what they call the headline number, which includes it. So if you have a borrower who says, hey, I saw the report today and inflation is 8%, they're probably talking about the headline number. If they say it's 6 or 5 or 4, probably the core number. So the point of all this is what the Fed cares about. They like the PCE index, that's their favorite, and they focus on the core inflation. So the core inflation in July was 4.6. Headline was in mid-6s in July, so it's clearly above their 2% target. So the CPI index was at 8% at the same time period. So depending on which index you look at, inflation is clearly above 2%. No question the Fed's way overshot their target of raising up to 2. And what they're trying to do now is slam on the brakes a little bit and slow things down. This is an eye chart. We'll go through real quick. If you had to look up one thing every day to see where interest rates are going, the 10-year Treasury bond, this is what people have always in our industry look at. It's easy to see. You can Google anytime, anywhere, and the whole world looks at this as a really good measure of where interest rates are for longer-term assets. So if you've been in this business for a few years or a few decades, the 10-year Treasury has always been a really good benchmark to look at. Every day as the interest rate goes up and down on the 10-year Treasury bond, it almost is 1-to-1 where fixed rate mortgages are. There's times they move opposite, so it's not perfect, but it's just quick at a glance. If you're really busy, like what's the market doing today? Are rates up or down? If you look at the 10-year Treasury, it gives you a really quick at a glance, and it's usually very predictive. So this is just a chart showing over time. You can see this better in the PowerPoint you have at home when we send this to you. It just kind of just shows you how rates have gone. The red dot here, that's January of 2020. We're thinking about COVID. We're wondering how serious this will be. The green dot, that's March. Fed jumps into action. We shut the country down. The Fed does all the stimulus. And then rates went a little bit lower. And we started recovering. This was November of last year. And the Fed says, hey, we think we're recovering. We're going to end the stimulus. We're going to get out. And you see how interest rates just jumped way up because the Fed is getting out. And the reason these jumped up is the opposite of the reason they went down. The reason they went down is the Fed bought a lot of 10-year treasuries. They're buying $80 billion a month, and they're buying $40 billion a month of MBS. So when they're buying all these bonds, that pushes up the price, and it mathematically pushes down the interest rate, which is what they were trying to do. So this is the Fed buying here, pushing rates down, and they stop buying, and rates go back up. And you can see on this graph here, they're about where they were pre-COVID. Yesterday, the 10-year Treasury just peaked above 4%. It's dropped back down to date about 380 before I came over to the meeting this morning. But the point of it is the 10-year Treasury is higher now than it was before COVID. This is the last boring economic graph, I promise. This is the MBS price graph. So bond prices always move opposite of interest rates. So whenever interest rates go down, bond prices go up, and vice versa. So this graph is just a mirror image opposite, but this is the graph that explains why interest rates went low. Same dots, January of 2020, March of 2020, the Fed announces they're buying $40 billion a month of MBS. The prices shoot way up. As the MBS prices get higher, many points higher, if you're a borrower, you got more and more points of rebate. So most borrowers with getting a 4-point rebate just get a lower interest rate and get no rebate or a half-point rebate. So this time period here, this is when interest rates on mortgages were in the 2s and 3s for many mortgages because the MBS prices were just so high. November, the Fed announces it, that they're getting out, they're going to stop buying $40 billion a month, and MBS prices just dropped. And the key point here, which will be really important later when we talk about where rates are going, is they're worse today than they were before COVID in these pre-COVID days over here. The reason this happened, in my opinion, is the markets overreacted to the Fed getting out, and they're not sure if the Fed can get inflation under control or not. And for that reason, there's a lot of negativity in the markets, which is why we have rates where they are today in the 6s and 7s. All right, that's all the economic junk out of the way. So let's talk about where rates are going. The day before, I was watching, it was a mainstream news, and the news headline was, U.S. housing is heading for its biggest recession in decades. And there's a lot of things we can try and predict, things we can't predict. If there's one thing I can be extremely confident with you on, is that comment could not be more incorrect. So if there's one thing or one page I could give you to arm you with facts for that conversation, this is that page. So I'm not sure how well you can see it, I'll walk through it really quickly. But the point of it is, this is not like a little bit different than 2008. It could not be more extremely different than 2008, and we'll kind of go through why. So when it says the word decades, this is the worst recession in decades coming up. To me, a decade is 10 years. So when we say decades, that means it's more than one decade, which means at least 20 years. If you go back 20 years, it was 2002. So the Great Recession was 2008. So that headline to me tells a consumer, this is going to be like 2008. So with confidence as professionals, here's what we can tell borrowers, and the conclusion is could not be more extremely different. So if we think about like what caused 2008 to happen, if anybody in this room has worked in construction, I have family or friends in construction, we as a country overbuilt homes in the years up to 2008. We were building more homes than we had households. So there was an oversupply of homes. And anybody who worked in the construction industry before 2008 just got hammered hard. I used to work in construction, I have a lot of friends that did. They lost their businesses. It was a horrible hit to our construction industry. If you recall, there was lots of subdivisions that when 2008 hit, home prices started coming down. There were entire subdivisions empty, unsold. No buyer at any price would buy the homes. You had politicians saying, let's burn them down or bulldoze them down to remove supply out of the market. So in 2008, we had more homes than households. In today, according to the Realtors Association, many other economists, we're 4 to 5 million units short of households today. Not future growth, but today's household size. 4 to 5 million short. If every builder today, if you look at housing starts and applications for building permits, the numbers are about 1 million on an annual basis. So if every builder was really confident in the market, which they're not, but if they were really confident in building at full speed, we're a little over 1 million units a year at our current capacity to build. And we're short 4 to 5 million. So the simple math is it's going to take us years just to catch up. That's a very important point. But back to why it's not 2008. We had way overbuilt in 2008. We are way 4 to 5 million under. I mean, extreme opposites. Not sort of different, I mean extreme opposites. The next point was in 2008, the underwriting was a joke. You had stated income loans, you had ninjas. You could literally have no job, no income, no assets, and apply for a loan and get approved. There was a story about a taxi driver from Los Angeles who was going up and buying 4 or 5 homes at a time in subdivisions in Nevada, and buying them before they were built, getting approved for loans on all 5 of them. And before first payment was ever due, he would then sell them, make a huge profit, and just repeat. That kind of frothy activity is what destroyed the industry. People were buying homes that had no ability to even make 1 month's payment, let alone own that house and live in it. So pre-2008, stated income loans were very, very prevalent. Today, they're pretty much non-existent. If anybody's done a jumbo loan here or has any clients who've done a jumbo loan, they're extremely full documented. I mean, they are overly fully documented. I mean, so night and day difference on quality of underwriting before and after. The third item is payment shock. There's a lot of pay options that were done pre-2008, and these were loans that had teaser rates where the borrower had a really low interest rate, so they couldn't qualify for a regular rate, they could qualify for the teaser rate, but in 90 days that rate went up. So don't worry about it because the rate went up, and you're just going to negative amortize, and your payment won't go up. Well, they didn't read the fine print on those loans, and there were provisions where the payment could go up. And so once the crisis hit, you had people who literally couldn't afford anything more than the teaser rate. Their rate went up, their payment went up. Even though they wanted to keep their house, the payment was higher than their entire income. There's no way they could make that payment. And that payment shock and ridiculously high payments, that was a huge cause of the crash that happened in 2008. Today, pay options don't exist. Almost every loan that's been done in the last 10 years is mostly a fixed rate loan with a very few small percent of ARMs, and these ARMs are 7, 10 ones, mostly a few 5 ones. So night and day difference between huge payment shock and like 0 payment shock effectively today. Couldn't be more of a stark contrast. Next item was the ATM mentality pre-2008. So many people would rack up their credit cards and then do a cash out refinance on their home, strip out all the equity of their home and pay their credit card bills, and then they would repeat. Credit card bills would pay down, and they'd live beyond their means and spend it back up again, come back every 6 or 12 months and do a cash out refi. They were just using their homes like an ATM, stripping out all the equity of their homes. So that created 2 problems. You had people that were doing that, and they should have known that. You had like accountants doing it and not even realizing they're living beyond their means. They're like, hey, I can spend this in my house every 6 months, I can pull cash out, this works. They kept doing this many times, some 6, 7, 8, 9 times over several years. The problem was they're living beyond their means, and it worked up until the day it didn't work. The day they went in, they said, sorry, your house hasn't appreciated, you can't do any more cash out. Now they have credit card bills maxed, and they can't pull cash out to pay these down. Now they're kind of stuck. And the other thing it did is, when home prices were rising, if you didn't do a cash out refi every 6 months, you had a big equity cushion that you were building up. And that gave you a great safety net for a downtime. Well, they stripped that away so that when the recession hit, they had little or no equity. So they had no incentive to stay in the property, just walk away. So that ATM mentality was very prevalent. You could do cash out refis to 90 LTV, 100 LTV sometimes. You could even do HELOCs to 125 LTVs. So people were pulling cash out and going into 0 territory. It made no sense to 100 LTV or even 90, let alone equal 1 to 125s, having negative equity on day one, even before anything bad happened. Today, couldn't be more opposite. There's no cash out. There's no one doing HELOCs to 125. They aren't even doing HELOCs to 80 or 90. Cash out refis, there's nothing to 90. I mean, there's 70, 75s. There were some 80s, those have been pulled away. So people are not stripping out equity today. Today, pre-2008, complete equity stripping. Today, complete opposite. People, most borrowers today who've done rate term refis in the last 2-3 years are sitting on 10, 20, 30 points or more of equity. Next item is, let's say you're in trouble and you want to save your home, you call up your servicer. Extreme difference here. In 2008, if you called your servicer, they didn't answer their phone. You had to be on hold sometimes 10, 20, 30 minutes. When you talk to them, they give you a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Here's a bunch of documents you just send in, which was a pain in the butt for people to do.